Well, they often say that two is better than one, so this week we're doing a pinwheel, but not just any pinwheel, a double pinwheel. Let's get started. So to make this block, you're going to be using 5-inch squares. Now, I have two 5-inch squares of a print, one of each, and two 5-inch squares of a background. In terms of the background, we are going to be cutting this down to 4.5 inches. So if you want to start with a 4.5-inch background squares on both of them, you can do so. But for now, I'm just going to use 5-inch squares. I'm not going to bother squaring it down just yet. What we're going to do is I'm going to draw a diagonal line on both of these background squares here. And I'm just going to go corner to corner. Okay. And take note that I'm actually drawing this line on the right side of the fabric. Now, don't worry about the mark showing up on the right side of the fabric because this isn't going to be your cut line. So in the final block, you won't really see this line here. Now, while we're at it, I'm going to take one of the print squares, and on the wrong side of this fabric, I'm going to mark my diagonal line. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to construct this entire block using the two at a time half square triangle method, where we're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch away on both sides of this diagonal line. So let's make our half square triangles. So we're going to make half square triangles out of our two printed fabrics here. Now I did mark my diagonal line, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of that line. We'll put it right sides together. Now, I want to make mention of something before you go ahead and do these half square triangles because, well, take a look at this. Okay, here is my sample, and notice that the inner triangles here, they're not all the same color. Okay, and if you want all of these inner triangles to be of the same color, then you cannot use this 2 at a time half square triangle method. What you're going to have to do is you're going to basically have to cut both of your squares from diagonally from corner to corner, and you're going to get 4 triangles out of that. Now, from those 4 triangles, you're going to sew them back together into units that look like this, where the same color triangle is on the same side. Okay. When you use this 2 at a time half square triangle method, what's going to end up happening is you're going to get 2 units where the triangles are actually on the opposite side. Okay, now, and so instead of units that look like this, you're going to actually end up where this darker blue is going to end up here on this side. That is how, when I sewed the 4 pieces together, I ended up with alternating color squares or color triangles here. Okay, so for me, the alternating triangles here, that just didn't matter. But if that is going to matter to you, where you want all the same colors in the center, then you're going to want to cut your squares or your print squares, cut them diagonally from corner to corner on both sides, then sew the triangles together so that the same color is on the same side. Okay, but for me, I don't care where the colors landed in the center, so I'm just going to use this 2 at a time half square triangle method, and we're going to sew both sides of the diagonal, and we're going to cut it in half. So let's make these half square triangles. So again, just sewing 1/4 inch away from the center. Move all of this other stuff away. And I'm going to turn it around. Okay, so I sewed my half square triangles on both sides of that diagonal line. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to cut on that diagonal line that we drew. Okay, then we have half square triangles here. We're going to square these half square triangles to 4.5 inches. So let's do that. Just as a review, if you've never seen this method of squaring up a half square triangle, here's what I'm doing. I want to make this half square triangle or I want to cut this down to 4.5 inches. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the ruler and I'm putting the 4.5 inch mark here, making sure that it meets up to the seam that I sewn diagonally. And I'm also looking up at the 4.5 inch mark here and looking to make sure that it lines up with the seam line. So I place the opening of the triangle up in the upper right corner. Now if you're a left-hander, you can still do this method, but just make sure that the opening is in the upper left corner. And same thing, you just want to make sure that your 4.5 inch or that the 4.5 inch line meets up with your seam line here, as well as meets up with the seam line here. So I'm a little off there. Shift that down. So making sure your 4.5 meets here, 4.5 meets there. So got it. And you cut one side here, and then you cut across the top. You can flip this around. And now what you're doing is you make sure that your fabric is on the 4.5 inch mark, or the 4.5 inch line, both here as well as down here. And this time you're just cutting off the dog ears there and there. And what you should have left over is a nice 4.5 inch half square triangle. And again, I'm just going to press the seam allowance over to the darker fabric. I'm just going to finger press that. So now that we got our two half square triangles together, we're going to pair each one with a background fabric here. Now this background fabric, okay, let's work with one of them at a time. The background fabric is a 5 inch square. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to place this diagonal seam in the opposite direction of the diagonal seam or the diagonal line that I've drawn beforehand. So here is my diagonal line that I drawn on. This is now going to go, or this diagonal seam of the half square triangle is going to go the opposite direction. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm looking at each of these corners here, this corner here as well as this bottom corner here, and I'm making sure that the corners are on that drawn diagonal line. Again, when I put my half square triangle and match it up to the background, let me move this out of the way for a second. Or actually, let me flip this over so that you can kind of clearly, so you're not distracted by all the lines. Again, when I put my half square triangle onto the background fabric, here's my diagonal line that I drew on. I'm going to place the diagonal of the half square triangle in the opposite direction, But I'm also going to make sure that when I line up the fabric, I'm putting the corner and making sure that it matches to that diagonal line that I drew on, both here as well as here. If everything looks good, what I can then do is, first of all, I will stick a pin just to make sure that the fabric's not going to shift on me. Then take my ruler. I will mark that diagonal line here on the half square triangle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from that line that I just drew. Okay, so repeating that with this one. That looks okay. And then stick a pin in here just to make sure that the fabrics don't shift on me. Double check it. Okay, this fabric actually shifted, so I'm going to make it move again. And stick a pin in it. Then I'll just draw the line again. This pencil mark is, you probably can't see it really well because it's so light. It is there, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from that pencil line here. So let's go back to the sewing machine. Okay, so here's a problem that you might encounter. Notice in my seam allowance that the seam actually flipped open. Not a big issue in this case. If you decide to actually press the seam over to one side, in order to deal with that, you can basically take your scissors and just trim off that seam allowance so that you can flip it down. Okay, so let me just clip it. Okay. And okay, so it'll make your seam relax a little more, a little better. We're going to take our ruler and we're going to cut on that drawn line, or that drawn diagonal line here. Okay, now I know these triangles look a little funky right now because of the background. Here is where the beauty of all of this comes in, though. We're going to square these triangles down now to 4 inches. And we're going to do it similar to how we did the other half square triangles, but there's one more factor to be aware of, and that's this seam here. Okay, so I'm going to line up my ruler, making sure that a 4-inch mark here matches and the 4-inch mark here matches to the seams on both of these, on both ends here. But I also have to make sure that this 45-degree line here is right on top of the seam line that of the half square triangle. So there's 3 points to match. Match up here, making sure that the seam matches to the 4-inch mark here. Match down here. Again, the seam has to be on that 4-inch mark here. And I'm double checking to make sure that the diagonal seam here is aligned with that 45-degree line that's on my ruler. When all of those match up, now I'm going to cut all of that off. And we're going to flip it over. And this time we're matching 4-inch line here, 4-inch line here on that edge of the fabric. And basically, we're just cutting off our dog ears at this point. And what we have is a half square triangle that is sewn to a 1/4 half square triangle. This square should measure 4 inches, in which, let me double check. Yep, it does. Now my seam allowance, I'm just going to press it over to the 1/4 square triangles. Let's do the same thing with this one again. I'm making sure that the 4-inch mark here matches to the seam, making sure that the 4-inch mark here also is in line with the seam, then making sure that our diagonal seam here is on or aligns with the diagonal or the 45-degree line here. Now I'm going to trim all of this away. Turn it around. And we're making sure that the 4-inch line here matches to the 4-inch line there also matches. And we'll trim off our dog ears. Open it up. And I'm just going to finger press the seam allowance. And when you do this, be careful because you are on the bias here. So you don't want to necessarily stretch the fabrics out. If by chance, I mean, I know this, again, this looks really funky because of the fact that our background square is at 5 inches and our half square triangle in this case is actually 4 inches. Now, if you're uncomfortable or if this really confuses you, what you can do is instead of using a 5-inch background square, cut it down to 4.5 inches. Then this way, it's the exact size of the half square triangle so that all of this excess background fabric on all of the 4 sides here might be a little less confusing for you. I just chose to do it like this because I knew that, well, there was no point in me cutting it down to a 4.5-inch size, especially if I knew I was going to be trimming all of that off at this point. So, but if this is confusing you, go ahead and cut your background square to 4.5 inches. So I'm going to cut this here. For those of you that are opting to actually make these inner triangles match, okay, again, what you should have done by now is take your 2 print squares, you're going to cut it diagonally so that you get 4 triangles. Cut it diagonally both ways, I should say, so that you'll end up with 4 triangles, and you do that with both of the print squares. Then you're going to sew the units together to make larger triangles that look like this, in which you're going to place the same fabric or the same color on the same side of the triangle. Now at this point, what you will do now is take your background square and just cut it diagonally once, in which I will do that. Then match it up with your other quarter square triangle, and you'll sew on this seam here. If you're just following me verbatim and you don't care whether or not those inner triangles match, don't worry about this. Just skip over all of that. You know, sometimes things like that matter to me sometimes, but most of the time, nah. I'll just take the easier way out. If you recall, I forgot what week it is, but I think on one of them, maybe was it week 3, where we did the log cabin block. And I mentioned in that video that the log cabin is actually my favorite block to do. But my other favorite block to do is actually pinwheels. And I kind of consider pinwheels my go-to block whenever I have extra half square triangles. I'll just grab 4 of them and make a pinwheel out of it. The problem though that I have with pinwheels is, well, I'll show this to you because I know you my friends and you won't judge me on this. Yeah, that center point right there, it doesn't always come out perfect. In fact, that's one of my pet peeves. But over the years, I just kind of say, hey, forget about it. Close enough is good enough for me on pinwheels. What ends up happening is I usually get an accumulation of all these half square triangles. Put it this way, this whole container is all pinwheel blocks of different sizes and different colors. These are basically just scraps. You know when you snowball a corner and then you have to cut off that extra piece in the back? That's what these are. And so I just kind of accumulate them and just make pinwheels out of them. And if I need some quick project, or if I just want to sew something together, I'll grab this, or I'll grab my crumb bin, or I'll grab my string bin. I'll just sew these together. But what's your kind of go-to when it comes to half square triangles? Do you like making pinwheels, or do you like making star blocks? Leave a comment down below and let me know, or let everybody know, hey, when you have a half square triangle, how do you use it? Last half square or last one that we're going to square up. Let's cut this one down. If you don't want to rotate it and line it up, because basically you're just cutting the dog ears off here. Just take your scissors, line it up, trim off that dog ear. Oh, that went flying. Where did that go? And you have a nice half square, quarter square triangle. 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 I know what some of you are going to say. Actually, I know what one particular person is going to say. Yes, I created another jingle. Half square, quarter square triangle. Half square, quarter square triangle. I think I need a drink. I'm not drunk, but I just spilled all over myself. Oh well. Now this is not my normal elixir. Well, someone gave me the suggestion of mixing orange juice and cranberry juice and coming up with this concoction. So let's try it. I think I have a second elixir to go. Yep, that's a good one. Unfortunately, I made a mess of myself here. But that's how you know this elixir is going to be good. Ooh, that was just too good. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, you're going to be the backup elixir. Yes. And you're going to be the backup glass too. Cheers. We got our 4 units here. Before we lay out the block, I'm actually going to press the seams, or press these blocks, or press these units, I should say, to make sure that they just lie flat. So let's get these units pressed up and let's lay out the block. So I got my units all pressed nicely and kind of thought, well, before we put this block or sew this block together, let's play around with the layout and see what other creations we can do. Play around with the block layout and see what designs you come up with. Now, you don't necessarily have to do a double pinwheel. You can do whatever design you come up with. But for me, I'm making a double pinwheel, so that's how I'm going to lay it out. So let's get this block laid out and let's get this block sewn together. Wait, I'm going to need another drink. That was too quick. I think I need another. Nah. And here is my double pinwheel block. Now the block finishes at about 7.5 inches, give or take your 1/4 inch seam allowance as always. Now, one thing I would like to point out, you see the seam here? Notice that it ends a 1/4 inch away from the fabric edge. That is actually correct. Don't make the mistake that this seam is supposed to go all the way out to the fabric edge. That's not correct. It's supposed to stop a 1/4 inch away so that when you sew on the next block or you sew on the sashing, you're not going to lose that point. So I was making the mistake in fudging the block and making this seam go all the way out to the fabric edge. Nope, that's not correct. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching me make the double pinwheel block. Now go out and create your double pinwheel block. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications on when I upload the next video. Put a comment down below saying what you liked or maybe even what you didn't like. And join the Facebook discussion group at Treasure Heart Creations. You can post pictures of the blocks that you created or just scroll through and gather inspiration from other Treasure Heart Creation group members. And from time to time, there are giveaways exclusively for Treasure Heart Creation group members. So use the link in the description box below to sign up. If you're on Instagram, post pictures of the blocks that you're working on using the hashtag THC5252. Well, that's it for now. Now go out and create something.